Good morning. I'm here to talk about the power of comedy because I think that comedy is one of the most powerful ways of communicating a message. Most importantly, it is useful to communicate a message to maybe someone who didn't want to hear it. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about where comedy comes from because I think it's natural. I think comedy is human nature. A lot of you have heard of the famous fight or flight response. Primitive man, when faced with an aggressor, had two choices: fight or run like hell. And, some of the ones that fought lost. Some of the ones that ran like hell got caught, and then their genes were removed from the gene pool. And, and that's evolution, right? And I think about my ancestors and think to myself, well, if my ancestors were anything like me, they were too weak to fight, too slow to run. How the hell did I get here? And it makes me think that there's got to be a third way. There's something besides fight or flight. There's a third way, and I think that my ancestors must have faced the aggressor and then distracted them with a joke. I imagine the aggressor was like, "I will eat you." And my ancestor was like, "Oh, no eat. Two Neanderthals walk into bar. First Neanderthals say, 'Nothing. Neanderthal have primitive vocal capacity.'" And then hopefully the predator kind of went, and was disarmed. And then either my ancestor made friends or got out of there, or maybe he endeared himself so much to the predator that he wanted to mate with my ancestor, which could be a problem in and of itself. But so there's a third way, and I think that third way is how not just I got here, but how we all got here. Because look around the room in this Stadschouwburg theater today with all the iPads and iPhones. There's not a lot of fighters in the room, right? And there's not a lot of runners either. We're different. We're TED heads. I said last year, we're like economist readers. We're a secret society, but at the airport, we know who we are. And the people we know, they don't quite understand it always. Our families and outsiders, sometimes they think we're just weird, pseudo-intellectuals, members of some artsy-fartsy cabal. But we know that they're right. And we don't fight and we don't run, but we use our brains and our creativity to get out of trouble. And for me, that's always meant comedy. When I was super young, the ideas I was communicating were always pretty simple, something between, "Look at me," and "I'm special," and "Mom and Dad, stop fighting, please." And then you get a little older, and the messages you want to communicate are more like, "Hello, ladies, only a fool wouldn't have sex with me." That was it. That was the only one. But now things are different and more complicated. I'm the founder and artistic director of a comedy theater called Boom Chicago that I'm not supposed to talk about, but it's right around the corner. And we do these tailored shows for companies where we go in and we talk to the company and we say, what do you want us to communicate? And, what are your employees talking about? They all hate your coffee. And then we would write jokes about that and, communicate the message. But man, today the messages we're getting are like, "Yeah, could you tell everybody that even in this economic climate, the future of our organization is safe and no one will be fired?" Like, yeah, we could do that. That'd be funny. I'll tell you what, that's better than 2 years ago when the message was, "Yeah, we're going to have a round of layoffs. Can you do a joke about that?" Like, yeah, we can do a joke about that. "Hey, everyone. Two guys walk into a bar. First one says, 'You're fired.' And the second one was you. You're welcome, boss." Just a week ago, I was doing one of our, again, highly successful and well-received tailored corporate shows it was for ING. And ING, I don't know if you know, they've just announced they are going to be shedding some jobs, 2,000 jobs. And I was doing an improvised bit where I was answering questions from the audience as a job that they suggested. So they yelled out a job, so I was a toilet cleaner, which is a very funny job. And so we're doing this lighthearted show, and someone asks, toilet cleaner, how come ING is firing 2,000 people? Thanks. So as a toilet cleaner, I said, ING understands what we understand, which is sometimes an organism has too much and you got to get rid of some waste. But the tough part, the hard job, is what you and I have to do, clean up the mess afterwards. And, with one off-the-cuff poop joke, I was able to communicate to these people what the top management team had been avoiding for weeks. So you're welcome. But it doesn't always have to be about business. Sometimes the message is much more personal. In June of 2006, I got the news that my wife was pregnant. This was good news. There was no fight or flight here. A month later, on July 4th, we got some new news that we were having twins. Okay. I'm still in it to win. We were going to have twins, and they were going to be born on February 11th, on or about. Well, on December 7th, 2 days before we were going to start Lamaze classes, the babies Tamar's water broke, and the next day the babies were born. My boys, Charlie and Dante, were born the next day, 9.5 weeks early. Now, if you've never had kids, you're probably thinking, 9.5 weeks, that sounds early. If you've had kids, you're like, Christ! Oh my God! And, well, that's what we thought. And because they were super premature, and it's just like in the movies. They're in incubators, just like in the movies, and you had to wear gloves to touch them, just like in the movies, and the doctors were always nervous. No. In the movies, the doctors are like, don't worry. Our doctors were like, yeah, you never know. So it was pretty stressful. So, but what were the choices? Couldn't fight. I mean, what am I going to do? You bastards, get back in there! And flight, thought about it, but didn't think very hard about it. No, I had to deal with it a third way, which for me was with jokes. So I started writing these letters to anybody that would read them, which were interviews with myself. And they were these sort of funny, question and answer sessions where I would answer frequently asked questions about, that's a good question. Frequently asked questions about Charlie and Dante. And it would be me talking to myself, so the questions would start out normal. Who do they look like? And then I would sit at my computer and I'd say, well, they look just like my mother and my wife, Tamara. But it was me asking the question, so I would ask the follow-up question, which was, really? And I'd be like, no, they don't. They look like babies. Every baby you've ever seen, but much smaller with tubes coming out of them. Cool? And I might ask myself, oh, this is difficult. Do you feel weird writing in so jocular fashion when your children are still at risk? Thanks for the question. I feel a little weird about it by making the conscious decision. This is normal. Every birth is different. This is how my babies were born. This is fine. It's normal. And then I might ask myself, don't you feel strange being parents but not having the babies at home? Who is this prick asking the questions? It feels strange, but, it feels very strange, because when Tamara came home from the hospital and, because she had a C-section, we weren't like, oh, boy, we're parents. We were more like, oh, you want to watch 24? Because we didn't know how to deal with it. Did we actually watch 24? Yeah, we watched it. Jack Bauer's cool. He's not quite like having babies at home. So, comedy helped me get through this dark period. And then the babies came home, staggered, one in January, one in February, and by March they were home, and then that was stressful. And they were stressful, but my dog, Levi, was not stressful, and so I dealt with the stress by constantly comparing my boys to my dog. And because I'm a nerd, I would, I would do it in this very nerdy way. I made a very formalized chart, Levi versus Dante and Charlie, March 2007, and then I would make a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet would, be very formal. How are they at returning affection? Well, Levi, it'd be great if it just snapped to. Levi, maybe actually, could you just do the slides for me? I'll say next, and you do the slides. Cool. Renee. Levi licks my face when I come home, sits on my lap on the couch, and is always happy to see me. Next slide. Charlie and Dante, Renee. Charlie and Dante seem to recognize my face and maybe my voice. Winner, Levi. Next category is skills. Levi sits and stays. She can sit at the street corner before crossing. She goes to her pillow when told. Charlie and Dante, nothing. Winner was Levi. A final one was was putting them to bed. Leify, no problem. The boys, oh my God, it was like the boys, it was Charlie and Dante, one at a time. It was this long process of, trying to slowly put them in. It reminded me of Indiana Jones putting the bag of sand instead of the idol. If and only if the whole time Dr. Jones, Indiana Jones, was singing to the idols over and over. Once again, the winner was Leify. So, that's going to be trouble. This is how I dealt with something that could have been very unfunny. So what else is unfunny that I've dealt with comedy? A big one for me was 9/11. 9/11 is a subject that I think a lot of people say you can't do jokes about. You absolutely can't do jokes about 9/11. So naturally, around the corner at my theater, we did a whole show called 9/11 Forever. And people said, you can't do that, it's terrible. But I said, you know what, I'm American, I think I know a bit about 9/11. And plus, I was in New York when it happened. I was actually in Manhattan on September 11, 2001, so I can make a joke. When I was there, it was crazy because like so many people, on the day it happened, you just walked around the streets, you didn't know what to do, your jaw was open, because you wanted to do something, but there's no fight, there's no flight, what? So we all went to try and help, but it turns out that after an enormous, tragic event, no one's looking for a comedian. So I would go to offer help, but it was like, well, do you know first aid? No. Do you know any construction? No. Have you ever been on a rescue team? Well, no, but I could come to the rescue site and make fun of the rescue workers. I'm great at that. I'll be like, hey guys, what's with the face masks? looks like a team of Michael Jacksons. No wonder the only survivors we're finding are 10-year-old boys, huh? Yeah, they didn't like that joke either. So, but in making it, I kind of felt, you take some of the tragedy away from the tragic situation. Doing this show 10 years later, I really feel like we untragedied 9/11 a bit, and now we don't have to live under the shadow of these two buildings that aren't there anymore. We can talk about it, what went wrong, what went right, the war on terror. That's something else we talked about in our show, the war on terror. We said in the show, Osama bin Laden is dead. Why is the war on terror still going? We've been fighting a war on terror for 10 years. World War II only took 7 years. The Americans were only involved in World War II for 4 years. That was the whole world in a war, right? And I feel like it's because back then we were fighting the war differently. We were fighting it better. We were all in. In the war on terror, those guys that are fighting, they're all in. But World War II, it was like everybody dropped what they're doing. It was like, come on, we're all going to war. We're going to fight, A-bomb, World War II, USA. That's how you fight a war. The war on terror, again, the guys fighting are fighting, but there's not enough. There's only 1 million people in uniform in America. World War II, there were 16 million Americans in uniform. That's like the whole population of the Netherlands. I mean, that would be like if every Dutch person in the Netherlands was fighting Nazis. And we know that didn't happen. So, we use comedy to take something back, but comedy is at its most powerful when it pushes something forward, and I'm thinking now of a political agenda. Politics, back in the last American presidential election, it was Obama versus McCain, and Obama, he was this breath of fresh air, he filled everybody with hope, which is pretty funny to think. Like, remember that, when he was full of hope? That was 3 long years ago. But back then, that was the story, and, McCain was running out of steam, and then in walks this breath of fresh air, Sarah Palin. And she's charming. You're laughing because you're TED heads. She's charming, and she's, likable. She's an idiot, but she's a charming, likable idiot, and it worked like a charm. So she starts moving the needle, and then in comes Saturday Night Live, which is the biggest comedy show in America. And the head writer, a fella named Seth Meyers, an alumnus of a funny comedy theater right around the corner, he starts writing sketches about Sarah Palin, and the sketches, they portray her as what she is, an idiot. And it wasn't, it wasn't out of line. You couldn't say like, well, that's not fair. No, it was quite fair. He even used her exact words in one of the sketches, but it kind of moved the needle back. And that kind of communication is not what I'm talking about. Because when a TV person talks to his audience, it's preaching to the choir, right? It's like coming here and trying to sell you guys on sustainable water fountains for, starving vegetarians. It's just we get it. What's harder is talking to people that you disagree with, right? Because right now, the politicals, everybody's yelling at each other. Nobody agrees on anything. Nobody's listening. And the only right now, America and the Netherlands are both run by these crazy minority parties that are not too crazy about minorities. And the supporters of those parties are not here today. And they ain't following it on Twitter either. So how do you communicate? Well, sometimes you're at that event, that family event, a birthday party, barbecue, and there's some of the members of the non-economist, non-TED, non-iPad side of the family there, and you're sitting in that birthday circle, and you hear someone say something that makes you mad, and you feel it. You feel that primitive instinct. Do I fight, or do I get the hell out of here? But you're at a party, you can't fight, and you can't even argue. You argue with someone like this, and they're just, they're hotheads. They're, what are they going to say? You're right, and I'm wrong. The best you get is they've turned red and have a stroke, which, feels good for a while. And you can't run, because then he gets the last word, and you don't get dessert. So you got to look for that third way. The third way is when you can get them to laugh at a joke. Again, they'll never say, you're right. But what they might say is, ha, 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 yeah. Because, ha, 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 that is when they have disarmed themselves, okay? And then the, ha, is when the door is open to your idea. It's a thin door. It's a tiny door, but it's all we've got. So if you're at a party and someone says something like this, austerity will fix the economy, don't fight them, even though they're wrong. Say something like, yeah, I read that in a history book from about 1937 when we tried it and slipped back into the Depression. They might say to you, oh, come on, baby, we don't want or need immigrants. That's a big one here. And then you say, you're right. There's a group of people in this country, and they're taking over. And they're not like you and me. They're lazy. They don't work. They just take and take and take, and they're all flabby, old people. Yeah. Yeah, old, and somebody's got to pay for these old people with their taxes. I say we bring in a bunch of immigrants and make them do it. Oh, I can't believe there's no global warming. This is a great one, because then you get to say, wow, God must love messing with the thermostat. And I'm going to leave it there. The point here is not that you should all take, improvisation comedy lessons and become comedians. But the point is that more and more folks are not listening to each other. They just yell and argue. But comedy can sneak you in there. You might not be able to make them go, you're right, and I'm crazy. But if you can just make them go, ha, 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 the door is open. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Funny.